Hey everyone, welcome back to Beneath the Surface, Petroleum Association of Wyoming's podcast, where we discuss all things energy and Wyoming and public lands and oil and gas and leadership, et cetera, et cetera. Super excited today to have my friend Angi Bruce. I think most of you know Angi Bruce is the director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and she agreed to come on and chat a little bit about what is going on with Wyoming's wildlife and wildlife conservation and wildlife partnerships, et cetera, et cetera. So Angi, thanks so much for joining us. Sure appreciate having you here.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. So why don't we just start real quick with a little bit about you and your background. How long you've been director? Where the heck did you come from? Give us the scoop.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Just over a year, believe it or not. The year has flown by, but been director for a year. Been in Wyoming for 8 years. Chose to come here. I know that people like to have native Wyoming nights at the top of the departments, but I did jump from my place in Iowa and came here 8 years ago just because I loved Wyoming and wanted to be here.
Yeah, awesome. You know, I don't know about you. Well, I'll be interested to know actually if you've had a different experience of this. I think that's changing somewhat. Mm-hmm. That whole like you have to have 17 generations in order to be let in or effective. But yeah, I mean, I'm surprised that it's only been a year. It feels like so much has happened. It feels like it's been a lot longer. Have you had that? But have you had that experience where people are like, well, you're not from Wyoming, so you don't really know what you do. Like, do you have that?
Not necessarily. I've been welcomed with open arms in Wyoming and really appreciate that. It's, there's quite a few people from the Midwest in this state that surprised me. So no, nothing but open arms ever since I've been here. Just fit right in.
Awesome. So I think the department is one of the most interesting agencies in Wyoming. It has sort of an obvious portfolio, I guess, but not a lot of what I would call obvious to most people intersections. So you're sort of you're really at the forefront of wildlife management, obviously, conservation, recreation, state policy on lots of different things related to those. And to me, it feels really complicated. And I wonder, in your mind, you've been at the department for 8 years. The whole time you came here to the department, right? So 8 years, a year as a director. What in your mind is the core mission of the department? How do you describe it? You can see it on the website what the mission is, but how do you describe it?
Good question, Pete. So the mission of the department is really trying to achieve conservation success of wildlife as it relates and as it meets the desires of the people of the state. And a lot of folks think we should manage wildlife for wildlife on its own, just for wildlife. But wildlife gets its meaning from the love of the people. And in Wyoming, that's really evident. So you say it's complicated, and I actually rejoice in it almost every day. Because when I came to this state, one of the things that just kind of took me by surprise was the genuine love for Wyoming by everyone. Even if you weren't a hunter, you understood and valued hunting. And you understood, even if you didn't spend time out watching wildlife, you understood why people did and why the state as a whole and the economy values wildlife. So even though complicated, I think it's exciting because we have that shared love and support. So when things get tough, we can go back to that. We can sit and we can say, we all agree that we want healthy wildlife populations. Now let's just decide how to get there. Which again, makes my job pretty easy to get to represent something that so many people want to see thrive in the state.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear. And I want to follow up on that a little bit because I love how you boil it down to that essence of people. I think we all share. I'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't agree with what you just said. That we love our wildlife. even if we don't interact in any way all that much, we sort of love knowing that it's there and that we have that as a treasure in Wyoming. I think that's totally true. I wish I could say, and I'm interested in what you think. I wish I could say that meant everyone agreed on on what that means. You know what I mean? So, and I think like that really, to me, that's where the department comes in, is sort of the focal point. Mm-hmm. Or I mean, guess is my word. Maybe you don't think it's the focal point, but it feels to me like the focal point of where all those things come together. Is that accurate? What do you think about that?
Absolutely, Pete. It's really about finding that balance. You know, one of those, a great example of that would be elk management. We definitely have hunters and outfitters out there would like to see more elk on the landscape. And then we have private landowners who would like to see less elk on the landscape. So finding that balance, that what is the social tolerance of elk? They're pretty easy to manage. We can grow elk without a problem. They're adaptable, they're easy to do. So the real question is, should the Game and Fish just let them get out of hand, or should we listen to what the people want? And so you're exactly right, is sometimes finding that balance between the two, where those two intersect, can be really hard to do. And that's why we have a lot of public engagement opportunities throughout the year, one-on-one, all the time, to try to figure that out. Again, we don't manage for wildlife alone. We manage for the people. So trying to find what that means can be the tricky part, especially when we have opposing sides in such a manner in today's society where we like to take one side or the other rather than trying to find something that works.
Right. Have you found in your time coming up on a decade here, how have you found that that interaction or the desires of the people, or take any direction you want to go, have you found that it has changed in that near decade of your professional experience, or has it been kind of static?
Ooh, good question. I think it kind of ebbs and flows. And what I mean by that is, let me back up a minute. When I came to Wyoming, I'd go to a lot of national and Western conferences like most of us do. And Wyoming was looked at as a leader in so many areas, and everyone wanted to hear from us. It was a little overwhelming at first. And then I'm like, well, why is it that Wyoming leads, and why is it that we get so much done in such a little time compared to other states? I finally landed on a couple of reasons. One, we have less people. Lots of wildlife, less people. It's why I moved here. Yep. But it's the same people that we engage with on all the different conversations. So Pete, I talked to you about migration corridors. I talked to you about sage grouse. The people don't change, but the subject may. So the relationships are already there. So it makes it a lot easier to operate in that space. However, we know how to operate. We know how to solve problems in this state. But what I see is, because we have this love for wildlife here, we also have a love for energy. We have a love for our ag lands and our wide open spaces. Yep. And as we go through time, one of them rises to the top. And then the other entity sort of says, hold on, back down. And then the other one rises to the top. So it's sort of this ebb and flow where you'll see this. And when it comes to policy, you'll often see the Game and Fish trying to meet the needs of both, or somewhat in the middle. You know, I had a mentor one time tell me, if everyone's mad at you, you're doing something right. And I laughed at it at the time, but it's kind of true. You watch that happen, where one entity gets really loud and really vocal and is really making a push, and then the other entity is. So it's trying to work within that.
Yeah. Well, we've never been the loud, the squeaky wheel, Angie, at PAW. So
no, never, no. And when I first came, on migration corridors, we had a lot of squeaky wheels. It really calmed down with the governor's executive order. I think that's when we came to a real collective solution. And now it's getting a little squeaky again, Pete. Yeah, definitely with the sublet antelope one, it's starting to get loud again. And so I understand that. I'd rather it stay calm and even kill. But I guess that's how we do progressive change is having those squeaky wheels.
Yeah, well, we'll come on to that for sure because I want to spend some time talking about migration corridors and the sublet antelope corridor in particular. But I always, when you say the squeaky wheel and you wish we would remain calm and all that, it's. I often say that we're one of the last places, at least in the United States, where we still have and we still in general support this idea of multiple use of our public lands. But that I feel like it's under attack from a lot of sources, and that it's that multiple use is going to cause tension, but it doesn't necessarily have to cause conflict. Harkening back to the relationships you were talking about before. But before we launch into the corridor itself and discuss that a little bit, maybe step back for a minute, and if you had to deliver a state of the state on how wildlife are doing in Wyoming. I know that's a big question because there's lots of species and lots of things, but what is the state of the state in Wyoming's wildlife? Are we doing okay?
We are, Pete. We are doing outstanding. I mean, we have seen, for instance, our hunter license applications continue to increase every year.
Oh, good.
We have a wanted commodity, and everybody across the nation recognizes that. It's very positive. We're very grateful. Are there challenges, and do we strive to do more? Absolutely, always. Status quo isn't good enough for us. But I would say with our support and our passion from our hunting community, as well as other support from the public, the wildlife are in a good spot in Wyoming.
Are there particular challenges, particular species that are? I mean, you got the ones that are endangered, of course, but that sort of gets taken out of your hands if they're actually listed on the endangered species list. Other than those, are there ones of particular concern to you that keep you up at night?
Absolutely, Pete. The department is spending a lot of time and attention, and you'll see more from us in the coming year to really trying to drill into our mule deer situation. They are bouncing back from the bad winter of 2022, 23,
Right.
just as we expected, but the overall trend is not good. We're not anywhere close to historic levels. And if we could just pull one lever and make that all go away, we would. The fact is it's many small levers and not one big one. So what we're doing is we're putting together a statewide mule deer conservation strategy. And I say statewide because it's really not just about the department. A lot of things in this strategy you'll see are not within the department's control. Some of those easy ones are like the weather. I wish we could flip a switch and make the weather better. But some other ones, when it comes to, say, county planning and zoning, diseases that we're trying to get a hold of, but in my entire career, we hardly know much more with CWD than we did 20 years ago. So there's a lot of stresses on mule deer, and they're compounded. Some of those stresses are higher in parts of the states than others, but yet the population's still declining. So mule deer is a great concern to us. We're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what we can do. It's not unique problem to Wyoming. It's across.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. So migration's one piece of it, but there's a whole bunch more when trying to understand the mule deer population.
So is there, I mean, I imagine there's some structure for collaborative work across states and regions. And when you're dealing with something like mule deer, that correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is it's sort of a structural decline west-wide. Is that right? And are there mechanisms to deal with that, or are we all kind of on our own at the state level?
No, absolutely is west-wide, and our work through our Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So it's basically our professional organization for game and fish agencies for across the West. We meet several times a year. We have a mule deer working group committee that's sharing research, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge. We have a separate migration initiative through that we're trying to spend lots of energy, resources on to understand. So yes, a lot of folks don't realize this, but sometimes I talk to my counterparts in other states daily. We're very connected. We're using each other. Yes, there are state lines, but we try not to have it divide our science or knowledge.
Yeah, well, that's good. Yeah. So you mentioned, so you've got all those organizations in the state. Last question before we pivot to the Antelope Corridor, which I do want to spend some time on. But honestly, I'm a little confused about how the Game and Fish Department's governance structure works. You're the director, like you're the big boss, but it seems to me from the outside that you have to at least report to, if not answer to, several other people. You got the commission itself, which I think is appointed by the governor. You can correct me. And then you've got the governor, and then you've got the legislature. How does all that work in relation to how you operate your department? And how do they interact with each other so that you have some sort of consistency on what you're supposed to do? Or do they not operate together?
Yeah, Pete, I like to say I have many bosses, including the public.
Yeah,
But yeah, you can kind of think of it, the old saying, a three-legged stool. It's somewhat like that, with the governor, the commission, and the legislative branch all weighing in on wildlife management. But I think it's even worse than a stool. It's an intertwined web. And you're right. Our commission, a 7-person lay commission who volunteer their time, they are appointed by the governor, but they're confirmed by the Senate.
Oh, right.
Okay. Yeah. Similar to me, where the commission puts 3 names to the governor selects a director, and then the Senate confirms. Okay. So as you can see, the web is very intertwined. Per state statute, which of course the legislators have established, it outlines the role of the commission. Mm-hmm. They primarily oversee our budget. We have no general funds, and we do not report. We just give report outs to the legislature, but our commission establishes our budget every year. Uh-huh. They also do our rules and regulations. Primarily fishing and hunting is surrounded by that. Okay. And then they get involved with internal policy, items that deal with staff and internal operations. And just a little bit, they touch on external policy. And I say that because the Migration Corridor Executive Order by Governor Gordon is a place where we just recently went through, where the commission had a role in that. That EO spells out their role. Other external policy, they play a minimal role in doing so. So definitely very nuanced. Our legislators were very much involved with them, especially our Travel, Rec, and Wildlife Committee, sure, because they set the overall scope for our hunting and fishing laws and a lot of what we do. They set our hunting and fishing license prices. We cannot just go increase our revenue. It's a legislative action that is needed. It's a nice balance of power, if you ask me. I have, worked and been aware of other states and how they operate. And this is a really good intermix. Now, you have seen some actions in other states where the legislature gets into the weeds of wildlife management, into the biology. Yeah. I have to say that I've been very impressed with our legislators that they have not done that. When it comes time to license allocation, so after we set a limit to how many licenses will be issued, so really focused on biological science, they tell us how many should go where, how many should go to residents, how many should go to non-residents, which is fair. They're a voice for the public. Now, you will see me get a little worked up if they start getting into the wildlife management, the biology piece of it. That is really what they charge us to do. Okay. And give us that authority to be the experts in that arena.
Gotcha. Well, I'm glad to hear you say it, or at least describe it that way. My thought was that it would be a little bit more of a mess than the way you've described it. But I think it probably goes back to what you're talking about at the very beginning about the importance in everyone's mind, regardless of differences in how you get there necessarily of wildlife. So let's talk a little bit about corridors. I think it's at least for my membership in oil and gas, it's much more focused, of course, on Western Wyoming. Those are the really long, intact corridors that interact with oil and gas development very directly. So the Eastern, the Powder River Basin operators don't necessarily deal with the same set of issues. So just real quick for level setting purposes, how many, there's different levels of corridors based on what the executive order said. There's all there, you all have an enormous amount of data on corridors all over the state. How many, just based on that data, how many corridors are there?
Oh, good question, Pete. I don't know if I can even say. Are big game moving in the state and have important seasonal movements? There's sort of a fine line when you talk about a seasonal movement versus a migration corridor and what that means.
Yeah, okay.
If we were to draw a line around every corridor in the state, it may be covered for the most part.
Yeah.
And that's not our intention. There's lots of movement going on. We want that movement to happen, but we're really focused on those long distance corridors, but really the ones that where a majority of the herd is migrating, and therefore it's necessary for their healthy population to continue that movement, to continue that important migration. We know, like you said, in eastern Wyoming, there's a lot of movement occurring, sometimes seasonal, sometimes even daily movement. But how much of the herd is moving? Is it significant? And is there any obstacles in their way, or is there a threat to them? So we're most interested in those that are really needed to maintain the population of that herd. And probably more specifically mule deer, because of what I laid out earlier. That's really where we are concerned. This antelope one that we're going through now is historic, it's significant, it's been on the radar for 20 years.
Right.
It would kind of seem ridiculous if we didn't acknowledge it, right, at the state level, because even our federal partners acknowledged it way in the past. And so it is significant, but as we know, antelope are much more resilient to infrastructure on the landscape, to movement, how they navigate through it. My most concern is on those mule deer migrations.
And so if you move up the ladder, then you all have pretty significant or pretty robust collaring data all over the state, as I understand it. So you've got that movement everywhere. The next level up in the executive order is an identified corridor, which is where the data has told you and your department, this is significant movement that's meaningful for the herd's functionality. How many of those do we have?
Good question. We've identified one, as you know, the mule deer that moved from the Wind River Reservation to Grand Teton National Park. So that was significant movement, and that was important for us to identify because our partners were really asking for it. The reservation, the national park, and it's good for people's understanding to focus in on conservation measures. Do we have a bunch more we identify? Probably not. There could be 2 or 3 out there, Pete. We don't have any in the works right now. But going back to why, it's important to identify any of these important migrations when we have a purpose. And that purpose to me would be to really identify to our partners, to the local communities, to our counties, that this is significant and we need to focus our conservation efforts in those areas.
Yeah.
Again, they're only identified because there isn't a threat to them, where the EO would take effect and actually move the needle. The ones that are designated have to really show what the executive order is trying to protect and what the threat is.
I see. So we have three designated, I guess, and then we've got this antelope one, the super long antelope corridor in Suffolk County, which runs through, of course, Jonah Field, the Pinedale Anticline, and ag lands, north to south, all the way from I-80 all the way up to Jackson, and spreads out. And like you said, antelope are different. As I understand it, I'm a wildlife biologist, but they don't necessarily go kind of, single file the way deer apparently do. They like to take some walkabouts and all this. So if you're looking at the, I think, you know, I testified in front of the commission, which you saw. When we look at that corridor, it doesn't appear to me like I would define a corridor. It's really broad, and it has all of these sort of like tentacles that go out, including kind of a couple segments the commission decided to keep in. They're a little bit almost separated over here. And the executive orders steps now, which we don't have to bore everybody to tears for, but essentially in the governor's hands currently to set up a working group and kind of keep working through this after the commission voted that it should be, they recommended that it should be designated as an official corridor. It seems so expansive to me that it's hard for me to wrap my brain around like why we call it a corridor. Can you help me sort of understand how that, in your mind, how that looks and why it's so big?
Absolutely, Pete. You should have saw it. It was bigger.
I think I did see it. Yeah, fair.
Yeah.
I did. Yeah.
And to describe that a little bit, because if you read the newspapers, you probably got a mixed view of why it took so long for us to get here. And there was a lot of pointing the finger at oil and gas. And just to clear the air on that, it wasn't, please blame me. It was to get the science right. Because under the other three corridors, which were mule deer, we used a Brownian bridge model. When we got to the antelope one, because of what you said, there was so much data, 14 years of data, plus the way antelope move. They may choose a different path 3 years in a row. Mule deer are going to choose the same path. So therefore, the behavior of the animal's different. And what that was doing is making a large footprint on the landscape of every possible path that they may take, instead of really honing in. So that model blew up the data. In fact, Dr. Hall Sawyer went back to the drawing board with us, and he published a paper on why that didn't work and what the new method was. The new method was taking away the model altogether, simply looking at the sequences. So basically, the string of points on a map where the GPS collar went off. So it was an actual movement is what we took. We took the actual movements, we buffered them a little bit by a few hundred yards, and then drew the line around it. So that's actual movement rather than predictable movement, a difference there. But then keep in mind, once we did that, that's what took us so long, figure out a new science to look at corridors moving forward. And it did shrink it in somewhat, more defined. But like you said, it's very wide, it's very spread out, and that's because of the behavior of the antelope. Now, I think we can look at it a couple ways. That is the corridor, but thinking about managing that corridor is where the big difference is going to come in. So under mule deer, we're going to look very precisely at any develop going in. As you know, we consult with everybody all the time. This is part of our regular operations. But because what we know about antelope, we can be more flexible than we could if it was mule deer. So a lot of folks, like we heard at the commission meeting, somewhat have a false impression of what they think this executive order designation will do. What it really does, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say don't develop in the corridor. That is a very narrow piece just in bottlenecks. And then even in bottlenecks, maintenance and grandfathered in practices are allowed. Everywhere else, it simply says, come consult with the Game and Fish. Come talk to us like you do with every other project. And let's work through this to ensure that the animals can still move through there. What that looks like and what the science says on them being able to move through there looks much different between antelope and mule deer. And we're going to take that into consideration when working with developers. So the lines on the map are just one thing. It's really the management and the implementation of the executive order where this all comes into play.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I testified to this publicly, so it's not, you've already heard this from me, but I think, what my members say and what I struggle with personally is, you say that under normal circumstances, you consult with project developers
Yep.
pretty much on any project anyway, as long as the system is working correctly and nothing falls through the cracks or what have you. And so when I listened to testimony about designating this particular corridor over some of the most prolific gas zones in the lower 48, quite frankly. And people talking about, well, we love our antelope. It's a critical. This corridor is iconic and it's critical. Nobody disagrees with that. What I really struggle with is a designation to me seems like it's symbolic more than it is substantive. That we designate it, but that designation doesn't actually change much from a antelope corridor functionality protection standpoint, in part because the executive order doesn't do anything with regard to private lands or other things that are that are threatening. I thought at the commission meeting it was really telling to have a whole morning about the tens of thousands of large game killed by vehicle collisions. But everyone wants to focus on energy development, and it's all just a disconnect for me and some of my members, Director Bruce. So walk me through it. What about a designation is actually meaningful to the antelope on the ground in terms of preserving that corridor, which I think, I can commit to you that my members, particularly the members in Western Wyoming, want to be a part of, but have a hard time understanding how this gets us there.
Absolutely, Pete. And I'm going to say, be pretty blunt here. I think your members have a hard time connecting that because the effect is minimal and the impact is very small. And why I say that is I'm not worried about you guys. You guys work with us. You guys have a reputation. You know that consulting with us, you've done it for years. In fact, your oil and gas industry is making a lot of those really good choices when it comes to sustainable development before they even walk in the door of the Game and Fish. And so they're not seeing where this adds a whole big impact or layer. And I think that's a good news. I think that's something to celebrate, that you're already doing all those things for sage grouse, for other species that are very similar to antelope. Where it might mean just a little bit of difference, like let me give you an example. Oil and gas well pads going in on another well pad. So they're not even impacting the footprint of the area, right? Yep. So there's no loss of habitat. But when you go to put that well pad in, we may say, hey, we've got the exact data of when the antelope moved through this area. When they cross here, it's usually about this 3 weeks or this month. Could you avoid putting that well pad in during that time period?
Sure.
Because we know that movement's going through there. So again, little tweaks to something they're already doing a fabulous job at. However, where it does have an impact and where I've seen it over the last 4 or 5 years, Pete, is really with the solar and wind industry. Oh. I've had wind companies, you know me, I'm telling industry, come to us early. Right. Come to us before you have your site selection. Come very early, let us impact and let us explain where the impacts will be. Solar and wind have done that, and they have seen the lines on the map, and they've purposely avoided those areas.
Yeah.
So we're having what I would call good impact that way. But oil and gas, again, you're not seeing it because in the 3 designated corridors, there hasn't been a single oil and gas permitted through the Oil and Gas Commission since those have been designated. And so therefore it's worked, right? Because it hasn't failed, but nobody is actively putting in new well pads in those 3 corridors to date. When they do, and if the sublets want to test it on, I have no doubt that we'll be easily able to work with them.
Yeah, I think certainly the sublet corridor is the most prolific of the ones that have been designated. So if it's going to get tested, it's going to get tested there for sure. Are you concerned at all with what Commissioner Bell mentioned about being nervous about the federal government, maybe not this particular administration, but a future administration taking a state designation and assuming that means we want them to come here and do something that we that my members and your department and would otherwise just do together in a way that's, makes a little bit more sense for Wyoming. Are you concerned at all about that, or do you feel like that's just a little bit of a false slippery slope argument?
Absolutely not. I'm very concerned about it. We do it every day. We work with our federal agency plans, rather it via RMP and EIS, whatever it is, every single day of trying to have them, what I call, stay in their lane and let us manage on every species, not just antelope, bighorn sheep. I could go on and on. So that threat is real. But let's back up. Let's ask ourselves why they're there. And they're there because Wyoming led this initiative from day one. And then the other Western states came on board.
Right.
And then under the last administration, the federal agency said, hey, we want a piece of that because migration corridors are sexy. That's where all the, attention is. So again, they tried to enter in, and we push back and say, follow us, follow the EO. We know what we're doing. And it's a lot of work. It's a full-time job just to keep the federal agencies in line. But here's how I look at it is, if we don't continue to lead, they will take over. And so if we're not the experts in the wildlife and putting what protections we think need to be on these corridors, it opens that door for them to step in and say, you're not following the science. You're not doing enough. Yeah. I don't want to give them that privilege of doing that. And so that's why we are aggressively working to stay in front of all of it.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. That's super helpful. And I think we did one of these with a state lands director, Stacia Berry, a little while ago, and the theme of that one was "Call Before You're Mad," which I think maybe we'll just change the name of the podcast to that, because I think that's probably pretty true with all agencies. And I just appreciate. I know I hear from my members all the time about the collaborative work, between them and your folks on the ground and you personally, and so we really appreciate all of that. I wonder if you could. Let me put you on the spot for a second. If you could just wave a magic wand and say, if oil and gas would do this one thing, we would, or these couple things, we would be in such great shape. And take that wherever you want. Is it just some the things we say, maybe some actions we take? Is it call before you're mad, or a combination of some things?
I'm going to say two things.
Okay.
And not to say that oil and gas industry is not doing them. I just think that's room for even better.
Of course.
Always call early. And not before you're mad, but let us be part of the conversation. I can tell you some companies that call us, particularly around sage grouse, and say, we're looking here, we have to develop here, help us understand. Some of them, it's the simplest conversations that can have the hugest impact. Keep in mind, we're biologists, we're not engineers, and we often work with engineers. So there's this give and take, like, hey, how about you do this? And then they push back and say, we can't because of this. And we're like, oh, that's understandable. So it's that conversation needs to happen. Don't make assumptions. And so call early. Right. And then secondly, reclamation. I think there's a ton of reclamation going on, but one of the things you'll hear me talk about when I talk about mule deer and other things on the landscape, we have wide open landscapes here and we have so much habitat, but I think it's starting to become a habitat quality issue, not quantity. We have the habitat. But any way we can do, there's some recent science coming out on the early successional response of reclamation in the invertebrate component, which is a really good thing for sage grouse. Yeah. That type of work is incredible. We need to do more. We need to understand reclamation and take it to the next level of restoration. Because like I talked about earlier, there's not a whole bunch of new infrastructure going out there. Industry's done a great job of minimizing that. But I think we also have to turn our attention to that existing infrastructure and how to restore it into quality habitat.
Yeah, I love that. And maybe I should have thought of that in advance, but it's a great segue for everybody watching. Of course, our annual Wildlife and Reclamation Conference, December 3rd in Casper. Dr. Bruce is going to be giving the keynote address. So make sure you sign up for that at our website. Really appreciate that. I know we're running a little bit short on time. I said I would get you out of here. If you have a couple more minutes, I want to switch gears and just ask you a couple questions because your agency is so fascinating to me. And how many people are there? How many people at the department?
Just over 400. So pretty small for a game and fish agency, but we get work done. So
Yeah, well, and yet, I mean, for Wyoming, that's a big agency. It's a big undertaking. It's pretty complicated. I wonder, you moved to Wyoming 8 years ago. You're in the department. You have this whole life before that. What personal values or experiences or both do you think sort of shaped how you think about leading a team of 400 people in an agency that is so important to Wyoming? Both from a practical standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint too. How do you think about leading a team like that? What values do you carry with you?
oh, that is so good. So Pete, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and my dad, who's 71, just finished harvest, or excuse me, he's 85 and just finished harvesting his 71st crop.
Crazy.
Working long days to make an impact is huge for me, and being able to serve the public, and it is just where my heart is. So it doesn't feel like work. But really, we have a fabulous, incredible staff, over 400 people, and just to empower them to be the experts and to do their job, but then challenging them to be very strategic about it. We're not going to get more employees. We know that. We're not going to grow government. So how can we be more effective? And I think we can be more effective if we really question our work. And is it strategic? What needle is it moving? What's it contributing to? Is it very intentional work? So that has us asking questions of, just because we did it in the past, are we going to do it in the future? And really honing in. In the next year or two, we're going to start another strategic plan and update that for the department. Okay. And that's going to involve a lot of public input. We really want to know what folks want us to work on, and then we'll gear our work towards that. So my management style is to dig in and to work hard, and then set an example of what we should be working on, and empower the staff to do the same.
Love that. And it makes me think, in a position like yours, and then there's a few other agencies that do important work, and the structure of it is you're the director and you've got all these people under you, and it's sort of it's a common, I think, theme, maybe a trope, I don't know, you'll have to tell me, that it's sort of lonely at the top, and I can see that in the position you're in to be sort of true. You're the boss, and people both inside and outside the organization come to you with very kind of specific needs and wants, including me. I call you with things that I would like to see happen. I wonder, how do you navigate that, to keep the mission of the organization moving forward, but keeping yourself grounded and connected to the people inside and outside your organization, just from a personal standpoint? How do you think about navigating that?
Whew, that's a weighted question, Pete. That's a lot.
If anyone's still with us by now, they'll be a
again, I love coming to work every day, and how I navigate that, and when I make those tough decisions, which are tough at times, you're impacting people's lives, you're impacting the economy, you're impacting individuals. I try to remove myself from that. I try to always go back and ask the question, what's best for Wyoming? What's best for the fish and wildlife of Wyoming? And that lets me sleep at night. And I don't want to say take personal feelings out of it, but I think if I think big picture, long term, it helps me. It helps me get over the hard decisions. And then at the end of the day, I go outside where we all should go in Wyoming. And, you know, the research shows that your blood pressure will go down if you spend time outside. So that's my
Absolutely.
excuse to get outside and then to pass it on. I have a 16-year-old son. And as you know, those days are limited. So I try to make the most of them. And he does a fabulous job having me forget the worries of my day.
That's awesome. Uh, that's perfect. Passing it along. I imagine some of these thoughts of yours and values have been passed along to you in some capacity. Is there a mentor that you've had that has kind of helped impart some of these values onto you, and you're willing to share who that is and what they've taught you?
Yeah, so back in Iowa, I had the chief or the director of our state parks.
Hmm.
And we were all one agency there, so quite big. And so I interacted, and he's now retired, and his daughter works for Montana Parks and Rec. So definitely in the blood there. But the way he kind of took me under his wing and taught me to listen to folks, I could really see where, you know, when you get in this field too long, people propose ideas, and you just think, you know, you kind of shut them down, or we've tried that, or I know
Mm.
better because I'm in this field, I'm an expert. Watching him with staff, with the public, and just try to dig further. What do you mean by that? Try to understand and listen and be open to all ideas is really what I learned from him that I carry on to today. Um, I also had, back to your last question, I had the person who hired me with Iowa DNR, a great friend and mentor. He said to me once, he said, don't forget it. You're going to make mistakes. Sit on it for a day or two, but go to what you should have done different and what you learned and
Mm.
focus on that and not the mistake. And then forget it, let it go.
Hmm.
And that was valuable advice that I try to remember. I don't always do a great job, but it's in my head to fall back on.
Yeah, well, both of those things sound like wisdom for all of us, quite frankly.
Mhm.
Well, Director Bruce, this has been awesome. You've been very generous with your time, as you always are to me and my members when we need some help and advice and collaborative work on how we can do this experiment of multiple use in Wyoming for all the things that we value and care about, including our economy and our wildlife, and they're all intermixed. So, just value your work so much, and thanks for the extra time today talking to the members of the Petroleum Association of Wyoming.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate your friendship and the opportunity. So it was a good chat today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.